Onto our weekly feature, Citizen Planet. And the executive order signed by U.S. President Donald Trump to withdraw from the Paris Agreement has been a big blow to worldwide efforts to combat global warming. Now, the decree came just days after the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO, reported that 2024 recorded unprecedented high temperatures surpassing the 1.55 degrees Celsius threshold outlined in the Paris Agreement, with concerns that this year could be even warmer. This story was produced by Susan Ndunda.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord Thank you. Thank you. But begin negotiations to re-enter either the Paris Accord or in really entirely new transaction.
America's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement has been termed a direct threat to international efforts aimed at limiting temperature rise and mitigating the catastrophic impacts of climate change, particularly for the world's most vulnerable nations.
United States, which is one of the biggest emitters, the biggest contributors to the warming through their industrial activities. And they've done this for 200 years now, more than 200 years. So it's one of the countries that are responsible for all the most of the historical emissions. It's the biggest emitter. And now they're stepping out. They're actually saying that they're not responsible for the actions. So the actions of stepping out of this is really going to impact multilateralism. It's going to weaken the way we act together as a planet in addressing climate change.
Trump's decision to withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Agreement weakens the global collective effort to tackle climate change. Let's remember, the U.S. accounts for 15% of global emissions. But if you actually account for historic emissions, the U.S. is responsible for a third of the total emissions that have caused climate change. So U.S. withdrawal will potentially slow progress to tackle climate change.
This coming on the backdrop of a meteorological report that paints a grim picture. The report released in January 2025 by the World Meteorological Organization confirmed that 2024 was the warmest year on record based on 6 international datasets. The global average surface temperature was 1.55 degrees Celsius. According to WMO, this meant that 2024 was the first calendar year with a global mean temperature of 1.5 degrees Celsius above the 1,850-1,900 average. In another study done by Advances in Atmospheric Sciences, heating in the ocean continued in 2024 in response to increased greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere despite the transition from an El Nino to neutral conditions. A situation that, if not tamed, will cause untold pain, losses, and deaths for vulnerable nations such as Kenya that continue to witness devastation caused by unprecedented climatic changes. At the recent United Nations Conference on Climate Change in Baku, Azerbaijan, African nations were advocating for a compensation package of $1.3 trillion to support vulnerable countries facing the greatest brunt of climate change. Experts warning that the U.S. executive decision could be catastrophic to an already struggling world.
But over time, the U.S. has not been meeting its responsibility. And with Donald Trump pulling out of the Paris Agreement is another setback, but it's not the end of the world. When you look at the Loss and Damage Fund, for example, in Dubai in 2023, where there were pledges of about $700 million, the US pledged only $17.5 million, which is a very tiny fraction, considering that it's one of the major it's one of the major causes of climate. We need to see the US actually take action, because with Trump going with his policy on drill, baby, drill, that means we're going to see increased impacts of climate change.
In a statement, UN Climate Change Executive Secretary said of the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement, embracing will mean massive profits of manufacturing jobs and clean air. Ignoring it only sends all that vast wealth to competitor economies, while climate disasters like droughts, wildfires and superstorms keep getting worse, destroying property and businesses, hitting nationwide food production and driving economy-wide price inflation. Despite great strides by the global community to mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change, those efforts now face significant setbacks following the U.S. exit, as the country is one of the world's largest carbon emitters and bears historical responsibility for leading climate action.
I've been very blunt. Climate finance is not charity. It is 100% in every nation's interest to protect their economies and people from rampant climate impacts.
Stakeholders are now worried that the situation will continue to deteriorate in developing countries, which bear the brunt of climate change effects exacerbated by actions from the global north.
Essentially, it means that the Loss and Damage Fund, Adaptation Fund, which are multilateral agreements, will be dealt a big blow. It also presents an opportunities for the bigger developed country economies to step in and offer those resources. It calls for global response, and it calls for multilateralism to keep alive the promises of the funds that exist. And also, it's an opportunity for countries to respond strongly to the effects of the climate crisis that they have been affected.
Others insist this is a moment of reflection for Africans to view this as an opportunity to unite, leverage their geopolitical strength, and transform vulnerability into resilience.
But it also presents an opportunity for the continent, actually, to come together with its critical minerals that are powering technologies of the future. It's time for the African continent to come together and develop what I'll call a Pan-African industrial policy that looks at how do we harness our critical minerals and ensure that we process them on the continent.
We should be part of this global discussion as Africans and say, what is the space for us? What is it for Africa? What do we need to do? What is our role in this big conversation? Even with all the negative energy that comes, but what is for us? Because we are on the receiving end. We should be a hard player. We should go into that game and play harder and stand for our rights and say we want even harder commitments and ambition from especially the other emitting nations.
Thank you, sir.
It is not the first time for America to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. During his first term as the 45th president, Donald Trump made a similar move that was reinstated by his successor, Joe Biden. Despite his recent move, 24 states in the U.S. have declared their commitment to the U.S. Paris Agreement goals. The states saying federal authority is supreme in the U.S. Constitution to protect, progress and advance climate solutions, and that Trump's executive order does not change federal administration. A statement that will probably give the world hope that all is not lost in achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement, which include reducing global temperatures to below 1.5 degrees Celsius.